Bill and Ted. The very first Bootstrap paradox ever put on a movie screen is hiding inside a goofy 1989 comedy about two metalheads in a phone booth. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, directed by Stephen Herrick and starring Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter, spends most of its runtime kidnapping historical figures, but near the climax, it casually drops one of the cleanest causal loops in cinema. The duo are stuck trying to break into a police station, and they need keys they don't have. So Bill just decides that later, once the adventure is over, they'll travel back in time and stash the keys behind a nearby sign right now. They look behind the sign, and the keys are already there, placed by a future version of themselves who, from their point of view, hasn't even done it yet. The movie pulls the same trick again with a boombox, a gun, and Ted's dad's keys. This is widely cited as the first clear on-screen depiction of a bootstrap paradox, a causal loop where an object or an action has no origin point. And the film never answers the obvious question: who first had the idea to put the keys behind that sign? Nobody. The idea, like the keys, exists only because it already happened. The Terminator. The most famous killer robot in film history exists for one reason: it built itself out of its own wreckage. In The Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, the machine intelligence Skynet sends a T-800 back through time to hunt the Connor family. But in Terminator 2, the crushed arm and the CPU chip of the original film's Terminator are recovered from the rubble by Cyberdyne Systems. Miles Dyson takes that salvaged future technology and reverse engineers it, and his research becomes the literal foundation for Skynet itself. Think about what that means. Skynet's existence is caused by Skynet sending its own hardware into the past. It's a closed loop with no inventor, no first spark, no human genius who dreamed it up. The films make it explicit that Dyson's breakthrough would never have been possible without that recovered chip and arm. So in Terminator 2, the characters try to break the loop the only way they can, by destroying every last trace of the future tech before it can seed the apocalypse. The franchise has never really untangled this across its later sequels, which lean into branching timelines that muddy the original closed circle. But the first two films give you the clean version, and the horror is baked right in. The thing that wants to wipe out humanity is also its own ancestor, and humanity keeps accidentally giving birth to it. Predestination. Forget objects looping through time. This is the movie where a person becomes their own mother, father, and worst enemy. Predestination, released in 2014 and directed by the Spierig brothers, stars Ethan Hawke and Sarah Snook, and it's based on Robert Heinlein's 1959 short story, All You Zombies. Snook plays a character who first lives as a woman named Jane. After a medical complication, the character transitions and lives as a man named John. Then, a time-traveling agent takes John back into the past, where he meets and falls in love with the younger Jane, who is, of course, his own earlier self. That relationship produces a baby, who is then abducted and dropped at an orphanage in the past, where she grows up to become Jane. Follow that all the way around and the truth lands like a hammer. Jane, John, the baby, the bartender, and even the terrorist called the Fizzle Bomber are all the same person, occupying different points on one closed loop. The character is their own mother, their own father, and their own child, an entire family tree folded down into a single individual with no external origin whatsoever. Late in the film, the bartender reveals surgical scars confirming he's an older John, and the story closes the circle by revealing he eventually becomes the Fizzle Bomber the agent has chased his whole career. Every single action taken to stop that future turns out to be the exact action that creates it. This is the most extreme bootstrap paradox in cinema, because the looped object isn't a watch or a book. It's a human being's entire existence. A person who is, in the truest sense, uncaused. Looper. A hitman is hired to murder targets the future keeps sending back, right up until the day the man kneeling in front of him is wearing his own older face. Looper, written and directed by Rian Johnson in 2012, stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis. In 2044, assassins called loopers execute people the mob sends back from 30 years in the future. Each looper eventually closes his own loop by killing his future self, collecting a final payout, and then living out those 30 years until it's his turn to be sent back and shot. The catch arrives when old Joe escapes execution and goes hunting for the child who will grow up to become a brutal crime boss known as the Rainmaker. But old Joe's violence is precisely what traumatizes that child into becoming the Rainmaker in the first place. The loop feeds itself, tightening with every attempt to escape it. Young Joe finally sees the whole shape of it, and he realizes the only way to break the cycle is to remove himself from the equation entirely. So he turns the gun on himself. His death erases old Joe, and in theory, stops the loop from ever forming. What makes Looper special is that it turns the Bootstrap paradox into a moral problem, a trap built entirely out of the character's own choices, where the only exit is self-erasure. By the way, if you're enjoying this, I make videos like this all the time, and a subscribe would genuinely help the channel out. Thanks. 12 Monkeys. A man is sent back to stop a plague, and slowly realizes that he's the reason it spreads. 12 Monkeys, directed by Terry Gilliam in 1995, stars Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt. James Cole is sent from a ruined future to gather information about a virus that wiped out most of humanity in 1996. The cruel twist is that every trip Cole makes ends up contributing to the very chain of events he was sent to understand. And as a boy, Cole once watched a man get gunned down at an airport, only to learn that the dying man was his own adult self, closing a loop he could never see from the inside. The future here is sealed, because changing it would erase the society that built the time machine in the first place. This is really the despairing cousin of the Bootstrap paradox, a closed loop where free will is an illusion, and every escape attempt only pulls the knot tighter. Somewhere in Time. A quiet romance from 1980 hides one of the purest object paradoxes ever filmed inside a single pocket watch. Somewhere in Time, directed by Jeannot Schwark, stars Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. In 1972, an elderly woman presses a pocket watch into Reeve's character's hand and begs him to come back to her. Later, he travels to 1912 and gives that same watch to her younger self. She keeps it for 60 years and then hands it back to him in 1972, closing the loop perfectly. The watch is never manufactured by anyone. It simply circulates forever, an object that exists only because it always existed. It's proof the Bootstrap paradox doesn't need killer robots. Sometimes, it's just a love story with an uncaused heirloom at its center. Tenet. Christopher Nolan built an entire blockbuster around a man who hires himself for a mission he doesn't yet know he invented. Tenet, released in 2020 and starring John David Washington and Robert Pattinson, runs on a concept called inversion, the reversing of a person's entropy so they move backward through time. The whole plot hinges on the algorithm, a device capable of inverting the entropy of the entire world. A scientist from the future splits that algorithm into 9 pieces, hides them across the past, and then takes her own life to keep the secret buried. The lead character, known only as the protagonist, spends the film chasing the people behind all of this, only to learn at the very end that he is the future founder of the organization called Tenet. He's the one who recruited the very people fighting alongside him, including his closest ally, Neil, long before he had any idea he would. The mission seeds itself. Neil reveals that their friendship, from his side, has been a long relationship that ends with him traveling back in time to die saving the protagonist's life. The story fully embraces the idea that the past can't be changed because it was always already this way. The protagonist organization, his recruits, his whole purpose, none of it has an origin outside itself. It's the Bootstrap paradox scaled all the way up to a global spy thriller, and it's the reason people are still arguing about the ending years later. Time Lapse. 3 friends find a camera that photographs 24 hours into the future, and they very quickly become prisoners of their own pictures. Time Lapse, directed by Bradley King in 2014, stars Danielle Panabaker and Matt O'Leary as part of a trio who discover a machine that spits out a single photo of the next day. The loop starts small and elegant. Finn, a painter, only ever creates his paintings after he's already seen them finished in a future photo, which means the inspiration for his art has no real source. Callie knocks over a coat rack purely because a future photo showed it lying on the floor. They feel forced to recreate exactly what each photo shows, or risk deadly consequences, locking themselves inside a loop of their own making. It's the indie deep cut that bootstraps information instead of objects, and Finn's uncaused paintings might be the most elegant little paradox on this entire list. Timecrimes. A modest Spanish thriller traps one ordinary man inside a single afternoon with 2 other copies of himself, all of them forced to play out a loop none of them ever started. Timecrimes, originally titled Los Cronocrímenes, was written and directed by Nacho Vigalondo in 2007 and stars Cara Elijalde as Hector. He stumbles into a time machine and gets sent back roughly an hour, turning him into a second version of himself. Before long, there are always 3 Hectors active at once, all sharing one single timeline, with no branching or parallel worlds to hide the contradictions. The second Hector has to do everything he watched happen to him as the first Hector, including luring his own earlier self into the woods. Each version is forced to cause the exact events that created him, just to keep the loop intact. The film is mercilessly rigorous about this. Every action the later Hectors take was already necessary for the story you just watched to even occur. Built on a tiny budget with almost no special effects, it's the most mechanically airtight loop in the genre. And the dawning horror is that this ordinary man is the sole author of his own trap. Dark. A German series built its entire four-generation mystery on a book that wrote itself. Dark, the Netflix series that ran from 2017 to 2020, was created by Baran Bo Odar and Jantje Fries, and it spans the small town of Winden across multiple generations, all connected by a single cave passage. At the heart of it sits a book titled A Journey Through Time, in the original German Eine Reise durch die Zeit, which lays out the entire theory behind the show's time travel. Here's where it folds in on itself. The watchmaker H.G. Tannhaus writes that book, but only because a finished copy of it is handed to his younger self from the future. Young Tannhaus then copies the future book word for word and sends his version off to be printed. The text has no original author anywhere in the chain. It's fully bootstrapped, a closed loop of pure information that exists only because it already existed. And the series doesn't stop at the book. It extends the same logic to its people, slowly revealing that characters are their own ancestors and their own descendants, with one central figure shown to be the product of a closed loop with no clean origin, mirroring the self-writing book exactly. What sets Dark apart is that it treats the bootstrap paradox not as a one-off gimmick, but as the literal engine of its entire universe. It's the most thorough exploration of the idea anywhere in screen science fiction, and the self-writing book is the single cleanest example you can hold in your head. First Contact. The Federation may owe its entire existence to the very cyborgs that traveled back in time to erase it. Star Trek First Contact, directed by Jonathan Frakes in 1996, sends the Borg back to the 21st century to stop Zefram Cochrane's first warp flight and prevent humanity's first contact with the Vulcans. But the Enterprise crew follow them into the past and end up being the ones who ensure Cochrane's flight succeeds. By trying so hard to prevent first contact, the Borg trigger the exact intervention that guarantees that happens. The loop quietly suggests the founding moment of the entire Federation was only secured because the Borg attacked it. It's a clean, self-defeating causal circle, where the villain's sabotage becomes the direct cause of the thing they were so desperate to destroy. Tim Travers. The newest film on this whole list exists almost entirely to torture the bootstrap paradox until it screams. Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox, a science fiction comedy written and directed by Stimson Sneed in 2024 and released widely in 2025, stars Samuel Dunning as Tim, alongside Danny Trejo, Joel McHale, Keith David, and Felicia Day. Tim is a bored genius who builds a time machine for one specific purpose: to break the time traveler's paradox by killing his own past self. Naturally, the experiment spirals out of control into a story stacked high with self-causing loops and multiplying versions of Tim, leaning directly into the maddening question of where any of its events actually originate. It earned a 76% positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes from 17 critics, with reviewers praising its dense, joke-packed script. Ending here makes a point worth sitting with. The bootstrap paradox isn't some dusty relic from the 1980s. Filmmakers are still building entire movies around it right now, in 2025, which tells you the loop is very much still alive. If you enjoyed this trip through cinema's strangest causal loops, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.